Dane Dodge has been meeting some of the people most affected by the cuts these leaders are making.
It might not sound like it, but this visitor is friend, not foe. In fact, John Davidson credits Lisa Farnsworth with turning his life around.
General Sir Michael Walker, he was
a soldier since his teens. In 2006, he sustained a serious head injury while serving in Iraq. His marriage broke up and he found himself back in Derbyshire with nowhere to live. The charity P3 stepped in and found him a home in Melbourne.
Well, without it, I think I would be on the street. P3 is a grouping of people who can put a man back together again. That he or she could then, look for a good life again.
John is one of 800 people that P3 is supporting in Derbyshire, but it warns that work could come to an end if the County Council goes ahead with proposed cuts in funding.
What we'll have is people sleeping rough for long periods of time, living in chaos, massive health needs, massive impact on the police, massive impact on crime. It's a false economy. These cuts are a false economy.
It's not only charities that'll get a pounding from council cuts. Snibston Discovery Museum looks set to lose nearly £250,000. Leicestershire County Council wants a smaller attraction, focusing on the site's mining heritage. Opponents say it makes no financial sense.
The numbers of people that are attracted here from outside the county as well as within is significant. Very high numbers of visitors, and a recent report showed that this brings in for the local economy something in the region of £4.4 million, and that would be lost.
On the rear I used to sleep, and obviously just when we caught and down here.
2 weeks ago, this is where Daniel Cook was sleeping, a park in Mansfield.
Sort of a roof over the head and somewhere to get your head down.
But now, thanks to the charity framework, Daniel has a bed in a hostel for the homeless. After a life in and out of prison, he says it's the break he needs to start again.
The future's looking good. I'm wanting to do things with my life now, and I've got a few plans. I wanted to go back to college and do motor mechanics and a bit of cookery, and so obviously I've got plans now.
There are 15 beds in this hostel. All of them are currently in use, and there's a long waiting list. Nottinghamshire County Council is proposing to cut funding here by 80%. Framework says if that goes ahead, this hostel and 4 others will have to close.
Most of the people who use this kind of service do so because of psychological or psychiatric problems, drug or alcohol problems that have public health implications, or because they're homeless. And local authorities do have an obligation to help homeless people.
Back in Derbyshire, Lisa has brought John to an advice session in Ilkeston. Life is looking up for him, but if the cuts go ahead, this type of support will be a thing of the past.
Well, some of the people there on the front line of those cuts. So, Anne, let's take a look first off at John's case. We heard there he's an Iraq veteran who said his life was basically put on track by this charity. And this is a charity whose funding you're going to cut in Derbyshire.
Well, we're working very hard not to, Mary. I mean, if you take out of our budget the statutory services, the things we have a legal duty to provide, what we have left is not very much at all. And that's where this service is funded from the little bit that's left.
But when you talk about looking further ahead, aren't you just building up bigger problems by not helping somebody when they're in crisis?
Absolutely right. And again, we all know that. But when you
still have to make the cuts.
When you haven't got the money in the bank, what do you do? Now, what we did manage to do, because we set our budget last week, and the figures that it was based on, some of them were estimates. When the actuals came in, and that was during the council meeting itself, we found that we were £450,000 better off than we thought. So we put that money straight back in. And it's not a lot, but we put that money straight back in to services like the P3 services you've just seen. And that could be the lifeline for them. So we're trying to...
You're trying to tell me it's not as bleak as it sounds?
No, but it is very bleak. But where we get a little glimmer of hope, we're using that to protect the services that we want to preserve.
OK, well, Alan, a similar story from Framework, another charity that helps homeless people facing a massive cut, 80%.
The first thing I said when I realised that we were going to have to make these kind of decisions was that we were sorry that we were in this situation. It is deeply regrettable that we're having to make cuts of this nature. The Supporting People budget, which is the budget that supports organisations like Framework Housing Association, is being cut by the government, and that is reflected in the decisions that we're having to make. Unfortunately, these are the people, the most vulnerable in our communities.
But yet you realise that further down the line, this is going to cost more, isn't it, for the NHS, for policing, for all those sort of things.
I couldn't agree more, and I know Anne and Nick will agree on this as well.
False economies, Nick. Are these false economies? Making these cuts now a false economy for the future?
I don't think they're necessarily a false economy. I think that people realise that we have less money. As Alan said, we're sorry we have less money, and we are going to have to do things in a lot different way, and we're going to have to prioritise what we want to achieve.
Haven't you always had to prioritise what you want?
We're actually physically going to have to stop doing some of the things that we presently do. There is no more money around. I can't increase my council tax. The government aren't going to give me any more money.
You can't use your reserves?
My reserves are spoken for, and after the election I'm assured that the recession may be over, but the structural debt is with us for a good long time. These things have got to be dealt with, and there's no point shying away from them.
What do you say to those people that are campaigning to save Snibston, for example? What do you say to them?
I consulted my electorate.
Think of the tourists that brings in.
On where they wanted to see savings and where they wanted the money prioritised. No surprise, they wanted me to prioritise my spending on elderly persons, children, health, highways, and unfortunately for Snibston it was at the bottom of the heap of things that people chose to spend money on. Now we've not taken all the money away from the arts libraries and museums, we've taken a percentage away, and I'm afraid I cannot make an exception for Snibston when I've got the same sort of pressures that Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire have got in sensitive areas.
Some people would say, as Labour authorities, that you've picked high profile services to cut, like homelessness, deliberately.
Well, absolutely.
Proving a point.
That is not the case. I would never use vulnerable people as political pawns. That would be offensive to me personally.
OK, well, we were talking about the sort of obligations that you have, and you have more than 1,000 statutory obligations as councils, things that you have to do. How many of those do you think you'll still be able to provide, Nick, in the future?
If it's a statutory obligation, we will provide it. It's as simple as that. We may provide it differently, but we will still provide it. If it's statutory, it's statutory.
Will you become more like commissioning bodies in the future, do you think? Is that possible?
I'm not necessarily to think that we need to go down that avenue. That is a avenue. It's an 80s avenue maybe. I think what we're going to have to do is to look at the provisions of services in an entirely different way, and ask a lot of people to help themselves, and also to demand management is one thing. You know, we need to stop people automatically coming to the council for things and help them to help themselves. And as we've said before, one of the key things we really do have to do is get this bond with the NHS going right.
The issue is, even if we try and prioritise, there is not enough money left in councils' budgets to do all the statutory services and the other stuff that people want us to do. I thought there was a sort of glimmer of hope in the last few days, because Eric Pickles was on the television saying actually we are a wealthy country. And I thought that was refreshing to hear, because we are a wealthy country.
It just doesn't feel like it for most people at the moment.
We need to prioritise what's important, and I don't think the government is doing that. And the attack on local government budgets has been ferocious. Councils' budgets have been cut far more than any other part of government. And that, I think, I'm sorry to say it, but that's about the government shifting the blame to the local level. You've got us here in the spotlight today. We don't want
understandably so.
We don't want to do this. We are responsible for the budgets, but we're telling the government loud and clear that they've cut too far. And we can't...
You're shaking your head there, Alan.
...prioritise services like we should be able to.
I'm shaking my head in despair, because I absolutely agree with Anne. I'm despairing about the fact that the government clearly have cut too far. So that, you know, we as local authorities that want to provide services and assistance to some of the most vulnerable in our community are finding ourselves in a situation where, as Eric Pickles says, in a wealthy country, we're unable to do that, you know, with food banks on street corners.
Do you agree with Eric Pickles?
It's outrageous.
Nick?
We're certainly a wealthy country, and we are struggling with the money we've got to provide the services which we've historically provided. But if I'm honest, I can't see any government going back to how things were. We do have the structural deficit, and we are going to have to operate within the means that we've got.
OK, well, let's leave it there.